The dust cloud rose behind the herd like a biblical plague, and Delilah Winters could taste the grit between her teeth as she rode the drag position for what felt like the 1,000th time that day. She kept her bandana pulled tight over her nose and mouth, squinting through the ochre haze at the backs of 2,000 longhorns moving north through the scorching California desert toward the railhead in Sacramento. It was July of 1878, and the heat shimmered off the parched earth in waves that made the horizon dance and blur. Behind her stretched nothing but empty miles of sagebrush and rock, and ahead, somewhere beyond that wall of dust and hide and horn, rode the rest of the outfit. She had joined this drive in Independence, California, 2 weeks ago, desperate for work and willing to do whatever it took to earn her keep. What she had not expected was to be relegated to the worst position on the entire drive, eating dust day after day while the other cowboys took turns at point and swing and flank. But Delilah Winters had learned long ago that life rarely handed out fairness in equal measure, and she had made peace with swallowing her pride along with the dust. The sun was a merciless copper coin hammered into the bleached sky, and sweat tracked clean lines through the dirt on her face. Her horse, a sturdy bay mare she had named Juniper, plodded forward with the resigned patience of an animal that understood suffering. Delilah adjusted her weight in the saddle, her legs aching from the endless hours of riding, her back protesting every jostle and bump. The cattle moved with the sluggish determination of creatures too stupid to understand their own fate, bawling and shifting and kicking up more dust that settled into every crease of her clothing, every pore of her skin. She had ridden drag for 12 days straight now. 12 days of eating dust, of bringing up the stragglers, of choking on the filth and grime while the men ahead breathed cleaner air and cast occasional glances backward, probably wondering if the woman would finally break and complain. But Delilah had not complained, not once. Not when her throat felt like sandpaper, not when her eyes burned and watered, not when every breath tasted like dirt and manure. She had a reason for being here, a purpose that drove her forward even when exhaustion threatened to drag her from the saddle. Her father had been a cattleman before consumption took him 2 years ago, leaving behind debts that swallowed their small ranch whole. Her mother had remarried quickly, a merchant from San Francisco who had no use for a grown stepdaughter with opinions and a stubborn streak. Delilah had left before she wore out her welcome, taking only her horse, her father's saddle, and the clothes on her back. She had drifted from town to town, taking work where she could find it, until she heard that Logan Zeller was putting together an outfit for a cattle drive from Independence to Sacramento. She had shown up at dawn with Juniper and a quiet determination, and Zeller had looked her over with eyes the color of winter sky before nodding once and telling her to be ready to ride at first light. That had been 13 days ago, and in all that time, she had barely exchanged more than a handful of words with the trail boss. Logan Zeller was a man of few words anyway, tall and lean with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that needed cutting. He rode point most days, leading the herd with an easy confidence that spoke of years in the saddle. The other men respected him, followed his orders without question, and Delilah had watched from her position at the back, learning what she could about the man who held her immediate future in his capable hands. The outfit consisted of 8 riders total, including herself. Besides Logan, there was his segundo, a grizzled veteran named Pete Hutchins who had been driving cattle since before Delilah was born. Then came the younger cowboys. Sam Riley and Tom Bascombe rode swing, keeping the cattle from spreading too wide. Jack Morrison and Henry Cole worked the flank positions, and a kid named Billy Chen, maybe 19 years old with quick eyes and a ready smile, handled the remuda, keeping the spare horses together and moving. That left Delilah alone at drag, breathing dust and eating humble pie. She understood the logic, even if it rankled. She was the unknown quantity, the unproven rider, the woman in a man's world who had to work twice as hard to earn half the respect. So she rode drag and kept her mouth shut and did her job with a grim determination that left no room for self-pity. The afternoon stretched on, the sun beginning its slow descent toward the western mountains. Delilah spotted a steer starting to lag behind, its head hanging lower than the others, and she nudged Juniper forward to investigate. As she drew closer, she saw the animal was limping, favoring its left foreleg. She circled around, speaking low and gentle, and managed to get the steer moving again, but it would not keep pace with the herd for long. She would need to report it to Logan when they made camp. The call came down the line just as the sun touched the peaks of the Sierra Nevada, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The herd began to slow, and the cowboys moved with practiced efficiency to bunch the cattle and settle them for the night. Delilah worked the stragglers forward, her body moving on instinct now, exhaustion a familiar companion. By the time the cattle were settled and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, she was barely holding herself upright in the saddle. She rode toward the camp, where Billy had already started a fire and put coffee on to boil. The smell of it cut through the dust in her throat, and she dismounted with a groan she tried to stifle. Her legs nearly buckled when her boots hit the ground, and she had to grab Juniper's saddle to steady herself. "You look about done in," Billy said, appearing at her elbow with a cup of coffee. His English held the soft lilt of his Chinese heritage, though he had been born in San Francisco and spoke both languages fluently. He was a good kid, kind-hearted and hard-working, and one of the few who treated her like an equal. "I am fine," Delilah said, accepting the coffee gratefully. The first sip burned her tongue, but she welcomed the pain. It meant she was still alive, still standing. "You have been riding drag for near 2 weeks straight," Billy said quietly. "That is not right. Pete and I were talking about it. We figure the others should take turns." "It is not your concern," Delilah said, but without heat. She appreciated the sentiment even if nothing would come of it. "Maybe not, but it is not fair either." Before Delilah could respond, Logan's voice cut through the gathering darkness. "Winters, need to talk to you." Billy melted away and Delilah turned to face the trail boss. He stood silhouetted against the fire, hat in hand, his hair matted with sweat and dust. Even exhausted and trail-worn, there was something compelling about him, a quiet strength that drew the eye. "Yes, sir." She kept her voice level, professional. "You have been riding drag since we left Independence," Logan said, and his voice was rough from breathing dust and shouting orders all day. 12 days now." "Yes, sir." She waited, wondering if this was where he told her she was not cut out for the work, that she should pack her gear and head back. Instead, Logan looked at her for a long moment and something shifted in his expression. "You never complained. Not once." "I have had grown men whine like children after 2 days at drag, but you just put your head down and did the work." Delilah did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. "Tomorrow, you are riding point with me," Logan said. "You have earned it." The words hit her like a physical blow. Point? The lead position, the place of honor on any cattle drive. She stared at Logan, searching his face for any sign of mockery or jest, but found only genuine respect. "I do not know what to say," she admitted. "Say you will be ready to ride at dawn." The corner of Logan's mouth lifted in what might have been a smile. "And maybe clean some of that dust off your face. You look like you have been rolling in a pig pen." Despite herself, Delilah felt a laugh bubble up from somewhere deep in her chest. It came out rusty and strange, and she realized she had not laughed in weeks. Yes, sir, I will do that. Logan nodded and turned away, then paused. And Winters, you can call me Logan, sir makes me feel old. Logan, then, she said, testing the name on her tongue. Thank you. He waved a hand dismissively and walked toward where Pete was dishing out beans and salt pork. Delilah stood frozen for a moment, the coffee cup warming her hands, her heart doing something strange and fluttering in her chest. Point. She would ride Point tomorrow, with Logan. Billy appeared again, grinning from ear to ear. I heard that. You deserve it, Delilah. You have worked harder than any of us. Do not jinx it, she said, but she could not keep the smile from her face. I might fall off my horse tomorrow and ruin everything. You will not, Billy said with absolute certainty. You are the best rider here, excepting maybe Logan himself. Delilah doubted that, but the compliment warmed her more than the coffee. She tended to Juniper first, rubbing the mare down and making sure she had water and a nose bag of grain. Only then did she grab her own plate of food and find a spot near the fire. The beans were bland and the pork was saltier than the Dead Sea, but she was hungry enough to eat boot leather and be grateful for it. The other cowboys sat around the fire, talking quietly about the day's work and the days ahead. They had covered maybe 12 miles today, Logan estimated, which meant another 3 weeks at least before they reached Sacramento. 3 more weeks of heat and dust and aching muscles, of watching the horizon for trouble and hoping the cattle did not stampede at every jackrabbit and tumbleweed. Tom Bascombe pulled out a harmonica and began to play a mournful tune that spoke of lonesome nights and lost loves. Delilah listened, watching the flames dance and flicker, feeling the tension slowly bleed from her shoulders. She was bone-tired, but it was a good tired, the kind that came from honest work honestly done. She caught Logan looking at her from across the fire, and their eyes met for a brief moment before he looked away. There was something in that glance, something she could not quite name. Interest, maybe, curiosity, or perhaps just the acknowledgement of one rider to another. She told herself not to read too much into it. Logan Zeller was her boss, nothing more, and she would do well to remember that. But as she rolled herself into her blanket that night, using her saddle as a pillow, she found herself thinking about tomorrow, about riding Point, about sitting beside Logan at the head of the herd, breathing clean air for the first time in nearly 2 weeks. The thought made her smile as sleep claimed her, pulling her down into dreams of open sky and endless miles. The morning came too soon, announced by Billy's cheerful call and the smell of coffee boiling over the rekindled fire. Delilah sat up, every muscle in her body protesting, and took stock of herself. She was filthy, her clothes stiff with dried sweat and dust, her hair a tangled mess under her hat. She took Logan's advice and walked to the small creek that ran nearby, stripping off her shirt and undershirt and washing as best she could in the cold water. The shock of it woke her fully, and she scrubbed at her face and neck and arms until her skin felt raw and clean. She braided her dark hair, still damp, and pulled on a cleaner shirt from her saddle bags. It was not much, but it was better than looking like something the cat dragged in. When she returned to camp, Logan was already up and moving, checking the remuda with Billy and discussing the day's route with Pete. Delilah saddled Juniper and led her to where Logan stood with his own horse, a big roan gelding with intelligent eyes. He glanced at her and nodded approval. Better. You look almost human now. I feel almost human, she admitted, though I am not sure I remember what that feels like. You will remember quick enough when you see what it is like to breathe air that is not 90% cow shit, Logan said, and there was a warmth in his voice that had not been there before. Stay close to me and follow my lead. The cattle know where they are going by now, but we need to watch for trouble ahead. Rough terrain, water, anything that might cause them to spook or scatter. Understood. They mounted up as the first light broke over the eastern horizon, painting the desert in shades of rose and amber. The cattle were already stirring, lowing and shifting, ready to move. Logan gave the signal, and the outfit swung into action with the smooth coordination of a well-rehearsed dance. Logan and Delilah rode to the front, and for the first time since leaving Independence, Delilah found herself at the head of the herd instead of the tail. The difference was immediate and glorious. Clean air filled her lungs, sweet and untainted. She could see for miles in every direction, could watch the land unfold before them instead of staring at the dusty backsides of countless cattle. The sun rose behind them, warming her back, and she felt something loosen in her chest that she had not realized was clenched tight. Logan rode beside her, sitting easy in his saddle, his eyes constantly scanning the terrain ahead. He pointed out landmarks, explained the route, talked about the challenges that lay ahead. There was a narrow pass through the foothills that would slow them down, and a river crossing in about 4 days that could be treacherous if the water was high. They needed to make good time while the ground was flat and the cattle were cooperative. Delilah listened and learned, soaking up his knowledge like parched earth soaking up rain. She asked questions when appropriate, and Logan answered them without condescension or impatience. He treated her like a partner, an equal, and the respect in his voice made something warm unfurl in her belly. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the sound of the herd a constant presence behind them. Delilah found her attention wandering to the man beside her. Logan sat tall in the saddle, his posture relaxed but alert. There were lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun, and a scar along his jaw that she had not noticed before. His hands on the reins were strong and capable, the hands of a man who had worked hard all his life and expected nothing to be given freely. "You are staring," Logan said without looking at her, and there was amusement in his voice. Delilah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Sorry, I was just thinking." "About what?" "About how you knew. That I would not complain, I mean. About how you knew to give me a chance." Logan was quiet for a moment, then shrugged. "I did not know, not for certain, but you showed up ready to work and you did not balk when I put you at drag. Most people would have argued or made excuses. You just nodded and rode out. That told me something about your character. And now, do you regret giving me point?" He turned to look at her then, his eyes serious. "No, I do not regret it. You have proven yourself 10 times over, Delilah Winters." The sound of her name in his mouth did something strange to her pulse. She forced herself to look away, to focus on the horizon instead of the sudden intensity in his gaze. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That means more than you know." They rode on, and the morning stretched into afternoon. The terrain began to change, the flat desert giving way to rolling hills covered in scrub oak and manzanita. The cattle followed the natural contours of the land, and Logan adjusted their course to take advantage of the easiest paths. Delilah watched and learned, filing away every detail for future reference. Around midday, they stopped to let the cattle graze and drink at a small spring that bubbled up from between the rocks. The crew dismounted and stretched, passing around canteens and dried beef. Delilah found herself standing next to Logan as they watched the herd spread out across the hillside. "You are a natural at this," Logan said. "Most people take weeks to learn what you picked up in a few hours." "My father taught me," Delilah said. "He ran cattle down near Lone Pine before he died." "I grew up in the saddle. I am sorry about your father. Thank you." She paused, then added, "He would have liked you. He respected men who worked hard and treated their people fair." "I try," Logan said simply. "It is not always easy, but I try." They stood there for a moment, shoulders almost touching, and Delilah felt the air between them change, become charged with something she could not quite name. She was acutely aware of his presence, of the warmth radiating from his body, of the way his sleeve brushed against hers when he moved. Pete called out then, breaking the spell, and they returned to their horses. The afternoon passed in much the same way as the morning, with easy conversation and comfortable silences. Delilah found herself relaxing in ways she had not allowed herself to relax in months. There was something about Logan that made her feel safe, valued. It was a dangerous feeling, she knew. She could not afford to get attached, could not afford to let her guard down too much. But as the day wore on and the sun began its descent, she found those warnings growing fainter and fainter. They made camp that evening in a broad valley with good grass and a clear stream. The cattle settled quickly, tired from the day's travel, and the crew went about their evening routines with practiced efficiency. Delilah helped Billy with the fire while Logan and Pete walked the perimeter, checking for potential problems. When Logan returned, he dropped down beside Delilah at the fire, closer than strictly necessary, and accepted a cup of coffee from Billy with a grateful nod. "Good day," he said, and it was not clear if he was talking to her or the group at large. "Good day," Delilah agreed. Her leg was pressed against his and neither of them moved away. Tom played his harmonica again that night, and someone started singing a ballad about a cowboy who fell in love with a señorita in Santa Fe. The words were bittersweet, full of longing and loss, and Delilah found herself blinking back unexpected tears. She was tired, she told herself. That was all. Just tired and emotional from the long day. But when Logan's hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers lacing through hers with a gentle sureness, she knew it was more than that. She squeezed his hand, and he squeezed back, and they sat there under the stars with their crew around them, and something new and fragile taking root between them. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that was both grueling and strangely beautiful. Delilah continued to ride point with Logan, and they developed an easy partnership that required few words and little explanation. She learned to anticipate his decisions, to read the subtle shifts in his posture that signaled a change in direction or pace. He learned to trust her judgment, to value her input when planning the day's route or solving problems that arose. The rest of the crew noticed the change, of course. It would have been impossible not to. But if they had opinions about the trail boss taking a shine to the only woman on the drive, they kept them to themselves. Pete even pulled Delilah aside one evening and said, "Logan is a good man. Best I have ever worked for. You could do a lot worse." Delilah did not know how to respond to that, so she just nodded and thanked him. But the words stayed with her, warming her from the inside out. On the fourth day of riding point, they reached the river Logan had mentioned. The water was indeed high, swollen from snowmelt in the distant mountains, and the current ran swift and dangerous. Logan sat on his horse at the bank, studying the water with a frown. "What do you think?" he asked Delilah, and she realized he genuinely wanted her opinion. She studied the river, noting the eddies and currents, the way the water foamed white over hidden rocks. "It is risky," she said, "but I think if we cross here, where the bank is gentle and the bottom looks solid, we can get them across. We will need everyone in the water, though, keeping the cattle bunched and moving forward." Logan nodded slowly. "My thoughts exactly. All right, let us get to it." He called the crew together and laid out the plan. They would cross in the early afternoon when the sun was high and the water warmest. Everyone would stay mounted and in the water, pushing the cattle across in a tight group to prevent them from scattering or panicking. It would be dangerous work, but there was no way around it. When the time came, Delilah felt her heart hammering in her chest as she urged Juniper into the cold water. The mare balked for a moment, then plunged forward with a snort of resignation. The water rose to Delilah's knees, then her waist, shockingly cold even in the heat of the day. She gasped as it soaked through her clothes, but kept Juniper moving forward. Logan was beside her, his roan gelding powerful and steady in the current. "Stay close," he shouted over the roar of the water. "Do not let them turn back." The cattle entered the water reluctantly, bawling their displeasure, and the crew worked frantically to keep them moving forward. Delilah found herself in the thick of it, her horse swimming now, the water up to her chest. She could feel the current trying to pull her downstream, could feel Juniper struggling to keep her footing on the slippery rocks below. A steer panicked and tried to turn back, and Delilah maneuvered Juniper to block it, shouting and waving her hat until the animal turned back toward the far bank. Her arms ached from the effort, and her legs were numb from the cold, but she kept going, kept pushing, kept the cattle moving forward. It felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes before the first cattle scrambled up the far bank, water streaming from their hides. Delilah followed, Juniper lurching up the muddy slope with a final burst of effort. She slid from the saddle, her legs buckling, and fell to her hands and knees in the grass. Logan was there immediately, his hands on her shoulders, helping her up. "Are you all right?" "I am fine," she gasped, water dripping from her clothes, her hair plastered to her face. "Just cold. We all are." He pulled her against him, his arms wrapping around her, and she realized he was shaking too. They stood there for a moment, holding each other, the rest of the crew scrambling up the bank around them with whoops and hollers of relief. "Everyone across," Logan called out, still holding Delilah close. "All accounted for," Pete shouted back. "Even got all the cattle, not a single one lost." Logan let out a breath and rested his forehead against Delilah's. "Good. That is good." She looked up at him, and their faces were so close she could see the water droplets caught in his eyelashes, could feel his breath warm against her cold skin. For a moment she thought he might kiss her, and her heart stuttered in anticipation. But then Billy called out something about getting a fire started, and the moment passed. Logan stepped back, his hands lingering on her arms for a second longer than necessary. "We should get you dry and warm." "All of us." They made camp right there on the riverbank, too exhausted to push on any further that day. Billy built a roaring fire, and the crew stripped off their wet clothes and hung them to dry, standing around the flames in their long underwear and trying to get warm. Delilah stayed on the far side of the fire, modest even in her exhaustion, but she caught Logan looking at her more than once, and the heat in his gaze had nothing to do with the flames. That night, after the others had rolled into their blankets and the fire had burned down to coals, Logan came and sat beside Delilah where she was keeping watch. They had taken to sitting watch together on many nights, talking quietly about everything and nothing. "You were incredible today," Logan said. "I have never seen anyone work cattle in the water like that. You kept your head when others would have panicked." "I was terrified," Delilah admitted. "I thought for sure Juniper and I were going to get swept downstream." "But you did not let that stop you. That is courage, Delilah, real courage." She turned to look at him, and in the dim glow of the coals his face was all shadows and plains. "You bring it out in me," she said quietly. "You make me want to be braver, stronger, better than I am." "You are already all those things." Logan reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "I hope you know that." This time, when he leaned in, she met him halfway. Their lips touched, soft and tentative at first, then with growing confidence. He tasted like coffee and wood smoke, and his hand came up to cup the back of her head, fingers threading through her hair. Delilah felt something ignite in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire and everything to do with the man holding her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Logan rested his forehead against hers again. "I have wanted to do that since the day you showed up in Independence," he admitted. "You rode up on that bay mare with your chin high and your eyes fierce, and I thought, there goes trouble." Delilah laughed softly. "Was I trouble? The best kind." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Delilah melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt. They stayed like that for a long time, kissing and touching and whispering things meant only for each other. It was new and exciting and terrifying all at once, this feeling blossoming between them. Finally, reluctantly, Logan pulled back. "We should get some sleep. Long day tomorrow, I know." But she did not want to let him go, did not want this moment to end. "Delilah," he said, his voice rough. "When this drive is over, when we get to Sacramento and sell the herd, I want to take you out proper. A real dinner in a real restaurant, not beans cooked over a campfire." "I would like that," she said, smiling. "Very much." He kissed her one more time, quick and sweet, then stood and offered her his hand. She took it, and he pulled her to her feet and walked her to her bedroll. "Sleep well, you too." But Delilah did not sleep, not for a long time. She lay in her blanket, staring up at the stars, her fingers touching her lips where Logan had kissed her. Everything had changed in the span of a few hours, and she did not know what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt hopeful. She felt like maybe, just maybe, there was something good waiting for her at the end of this long, dusty road. The days that followed were filled with work and stolen moments. Logan and Delilah continued to ride point together, but now there was an added dimension to their partnership. Little touches when no one was looking, hands brushing together, long glances that spoke volumes. At night, they would sit together at the fire, shoulders pressed close, and sometimes Logan would take her hand and hold it, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on her palm. The crew pretended not to notice, but Delilah caught knowing smiles and heard good-natured teasing when they thought she was out of earshot. She did not mind. Let them talk. She had found something rare and precious out here in the wilderness, and she was not about to let it slip through her fingers out of fear of what others might think. They passed through the foothills, the terrain growing rougher and more challenging. The cattle had to be driven through narrow defiles and up steep slopes, and more than once they had to backtrack and find a different route when the way forward proved impassable. Logan navigated these challenges with patient skill, and Delilah watched and learned, marveling at his ability to read the land and anticipate problems before they arose. One evening, about 2 weeks into the drive and a week after they had crossed the river, they made camp in a high meadow with a view that stretched for miles. The sun was setting in a blaze of orange and purple, and Delilah stood at the edge of camp, watching the light paint the distant mountains in shades of fire. Logan came up behind her, his hands settling on her waist, and she leaned back against him with a contented sigh. "It is beautiful," she said. "It is," he agreed, but he was looking at her, not the sunset. She turned in his arms, looping her hands around his neck. "When we get to Sacramento, what happens then? I sell the herd, pay the crew, and collect what is owed to me." Logan looked down at her, his expression serious. "And then I was hoping you would come with me." "Come with you where?" "I have a small spread up near Redding. Nothing fancy, just 100 acres or so, but it is good land with water and grass. I have been building it up slow, taking jobs like this to raise capital. But it is lonely work, and I could use a partner, someone who knows cattle and is not afraid of hard work." Delilah's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "A partner, more than a partner," Logan said, his hands tightening on her waist. "A wife, if you will have me." I know it is fast, and we have only known each other a few weeks, but Delilah, I have never felt this way about anyone before. You are strong and capable and beautiful, and I cannot imagine going back to that ranch without you." Tears pricked at Delilah's eyes, and she blinked them back fiercely. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I am." Logan reached up and cupped her face in his hands. "I know I do not have much to offer right now, just a small ranch and a lot of hard work, but I promise I will take care of you and I will spend every day trying to make you happy." "So what do you say, Delilah Winters? Will you marry me?" She kissed him instead of answering, pouring all her joy and hope and love into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, she was smiling so wide her face hurt. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." Logan let out a whoop and lifted her off her feet, spinning her around until she was dizzy and laughing. When he set her down, he kissed her again, and she felt like her heart might burst from happiness. They told the crew that night, and the men congratulated them with genuine warmth. Pete shook Logan's hand and said, "About time you settled down, boss, and you could not have picked a better woman." Billy gave Delilah a hug and said, "I am so happy for you. You deserve all the good things." Even the usually taciturn Sam and Tom offered their best wishes, and Jack produced a bottle of whiskey he had been saving for a special occasion. They passed it around the fire, toasting to love and new beginnings, and Delilah felt surrounded by a sense of family she had not experienced since her father died. Later, when the others had gone to sleep, and the fire was just embers, Logan and Delilah sat together under the stars. "When should we get married?" Delilah asked. "After we reach Sacramento." "I was thinking we could get married in Sacramento," Logan said. "Find a preacher and do it proper before we head north. That way, when we get to the ranch, you will be coming home as my wife, not just as hired help." "I like that idea." Delilah rested her head on his shoulder, feeling peaceful and content. "Tell me about the ranch. What is it like?" Logan's voice took on a warmth that spoke of deep affection. "It is in a valley with mountains all around. There is a creek that runs through the property, never goes dry even in the summer. The house is small, just 3 rooms, but it is solid and has a good roof. I built most of it myself, and I have been adding on when I can. There is a barn and a corral and room to expand when we need to." "It sounds perfect," Delilah said. "It will be with you there." Logan kissed the top of her head. "We can build it together, make it into something real. Raise cattle, maybe some horses, have children if you want them." "I want them," Delilah said softly. "A whole house full of them, running around and causing trouble." Logan chuckled. "I think we can manage that." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and Delilah felt a peace settle over her that she had not known was possible. Just a few weeks ago, she had been alone and uncertain, with no clear future and no real hope. Now she had Logan and a home waiting for her, and the promise of a life filled with love and purpose. It seemed almost too good to be true, and she found herself waiting for the other shoe to drop, for something to go wrong and snatch this happiness away. But the days continued to pass without incident. The herd moved steadily north, covering 10 to 15 miles a day depending on the terrain. The weather held, hot and dry but not unbearably so, and the cattle stayed mostly cooperative. They had the occasional steer wander off or go lame, but nothing they could not handle. Logan and Delilah fell into an easy routine, working together during the day and spending their evenings planning their future. They talked about what crops they might plant in the vegetable garden, what colors they would paint the house, whether they should get chickens or just focus on cattle. It was domestic and mundane and absolutely wonderful. 3 weeks after leaving Independence, they crested a ridge and saw Sacramento spread out in the valley below. The city was bigger than Delilah had expected, a sprawling collection of buildings and streets with the river cutting through the middle like a silver ribbon. She felt a flutter of nerves in her stomach. This was it, the end of the drive and the beginning of her new life. They drove the herd down to the stockyards on the outskirts of town, and Logan spent the better part of a day negotiating with buyers and finalizing the sale. The cattle had lost some weight on the trail, as was inevitable, but they were still in good condition, and Logan got a fair price. He paid the crew what was owed to them plus a generous bonus, and the men dispersed into town with plans to spend their wages on baths, good food, and probably too much whiskey. Logan and Delilah took rooms at a modest but clean hotel, and Delilah luxuriated in her first real bath in weeks. She scrubbed away the trail dust and grime until her skin was pink and glowing, and washed her hair 3 times until it squeaked clean. She put on the one good dress she owned, a simple blue cotton that had seen better days but was at least respectable, and met Logan in the hotel lobby. He had cleaned up too, his hair trimmed and his face freshly shaved. He wore a clean shirt and trousers, and when he saw her coming down the stairs, his face lit up like the sun. "You look beautiful," he said, taking her hand and kissing it. "You clean up pretty well yourself," Delilah said, feeling suddenly shy. They found a preacher at a small church on the edge of town, an elderly man with kind eyes and a gentle manner. He agreed to marry them that evening, and Pete and Billy served as witnesses. The ceremony was simple and brief, just a few words and the exchange of vows, but when Logan slipped a plain gold band onto Delilah's finger and kissed her as his wife, she felt tears streaming down her cheeks. "I love you," Logan whispered against her lips. "I will love you until the day I die." "I love you too," Delilah whispered back. "More than I ever thought possible." They had dinner at a restaurant that Pete recommended, a place with white tablecloths and candles and food that tasted like heaven after weeks of trail cooking. Logan ordered steak and Delilah got roasted chicken, and they shared a bottle of wine that made her head pleasantly fuzzy. They talked and laughed and fed each other bites of food, and Delilah thought she had never been so happy in her entire life. That night, in the privacy of their hotel room, Logan made love to her with a tenderness that brought fresh tears to her eyes. He was gentle and patient, taking his time to learn what she liked, and when they finally came together, it felt like 2 halves of a whole becoming complete. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the sheets, and Delilah traced the scars on his chest with her fingertips. "Where did you get this one?" she asked, touching a long, pale line that ran from his collarbone to his ribs. "Barbed wire, about 5 years ago. Got thrown from a horse and landed wrong. And this one?" She touched a puckered scar on his shoulder. "Bullet. Got caught in the crossfire during a dispute over water rights. The other guy looked worse, though." Delilah shook her head. "You have lived a dangerous life." "It is a dangerous world," Logan said, pulling her closer. "But it just got a lot safer, now that I have you." They left Sacramento 2 days later, loaded up with supplies and heading north toward Redding. The journey took another week, but it was different from the cattle drive. They could set their own pace, stop when they wanted, and sleep under the stars without worrying about a herd wandering off in the night. They made love in meadows and by streams, and talked about everything and nothing until Delilah felt like she knew Logan inside and out. When they finally reached the ranch, Delilah fell in love with it immediately. Logan had undersold it, as she was learning was his habit. The house was more than 3 rooms. There was a small loft upstairs that could be converted into bedrooms for children, and the main room had a stone fireplace that dominated one wall. The barn was sturdy and well built, and the corral had good fencing. The creek Logan had mentioned was more like a small river, clear and cold and teeming with fish. The land rolled gently toward distant mountains, and everywhere she looked, she saw potential. "What do you think?" Logan asked, watching her nervously. "I think it is perfect," Delilah said, turning to face him. "I think we are going to be very happy here." And they were. The first year was hard, as first years always are. They worked from sunup to sundown, building up the herd, planting a garden, making improvements to the house and barn. Logan took occasional jobs driving cattle or breaking horses to bring in extra money, and Delilah proved to be as capable at ranching as she had been on the trail. She could rope and ride and brand with the best of them, and she was not afraid to get her hands dirty. By the end of that first year, they had doubled their herd and added a chicken coop and a small orchard of fruit trees. They had also added something else. Delilah was pregnant, her belly just starting to show beneath her work clothes. Logan was over the moon with excitement, fussing over her constantly and trying to get her to take it easy. Delilah mostly ignored him and continued working, though she did concede to let him handle the heavier lifting. Their son was born in the spring of 1879, a healthy baby boy with Logan's dark hair and Delilah's green eyes. They named him James after Delilah's father, and Logan held him like he was made of spun glass, tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," Logan whispered. "Absolutely perfect." Delilah, exhausted but glowing with happiness, smiled up at her husband. "We made a good one." "We did." Logan bent down and kissed her forehead. "Thank you, Delilah, for him, for this life, for everything." "Thank you," she said, "for giving me a reason to keep going when I had given up. For seeing me when others looked right through me. For loving me." James was a good baby, easy and happy, and he grew like a weed. By the time he was a year old, he was toddling around the ranch, getting into everything and keeping Delilah constantly on her toes. Logan was a devoted father, spending every spare moment with his son, teaching him about horses and cattle, and the land they called home. 2 years after James was born, Delilah gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah. She had Delilah's dark hair and Logan's blue eyes, and from the moment she entered the world, she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. Logan would sit for hours with Sarah in his arms, singing to her and telling her stories, and Delilah would watch them with her heart so full it felt like it might overflow. The ranch continued to prosper. They added more land, built a bigger barn, and hired on a couple of hands to help with the work. Pete retired from trail driving and came to work for them, becoming as much a part of the family as an honorary grandfather. Billy stopped by whenever he was in the area, and they always had a place at the table for him. The other men from that first cattle drive visited occasionally, and they would sit around the fire and tell stories about the old days, though those days were not really so long ago. Delilah sometimes thought back to that dusty July when she had ridden drag for 12 days without complaint. It seemed like another lifetime, another person entirely. That Delilah had been alone and uncertain, with nothing but a horse and a hope. This Delilah had a husband who loved her, children who brought her joy, a home that was truly hers. She had security and purpose, and a future that stretched out bright and promising. One evening, when James was 5 and Sarah was 3, the family sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains. James was chattering about the calf he had helped birth that morning, and Sarah was playing with a rag doll that Pete had made for her. Logan had his arm around Delilah and she rested her head on his shoulder, perfectly content. "You ever miss it?" Logan asked quietly. "The trail, the adventure, the freedom of it all." Delilah thought about it for a moment, then shook her head. "No, I have everything I need right here. This is the adventure I want, this life with you and the children and the ranch. This is what I was riding toward all along, I just did not know it yet." Logan kissed the top of her head. I am glad you found me, or I found you, however it worked out. I am glad too. Delilah lifted her face for a proper kiss, and Logan obliged, his lips warm and familiar against hers. "Mama, Papa, stop kissing," James said with the disgust of a 5-year-old who found such things embarrassing. They broke apart, laughing, and Logan ruffled his son's hair. "Someday, when you are older, you will understand." "I doubt it," James said solemnly, and Sarah nodded in agreement, though Delilah was fairly certain she had no idea what they were talking about. The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and celebrations. James grew tall and strong, taking after his father in both build and temperament. He was quiet and thoughtful, with a natural way with animals that made him invaluable on the ranch. Sarah was her mother's daughter, fierce and independent with a stubborn streak a mile wide. She learned to ride almost before she could walk, and by the time she was 10, she could rope a steer as well as any of the hands. Delilah gave birth to 2 more children, another boy they named Thomas, and a girl they named Lucy. The house felt full and alive with the sounds of children playing and arguing and laughing. Logan added on to the house, building more bedrooms and a larger kitchen, and Delilah planted roses around the porch that bloomed every summer in riotous colors. The ranch became known throughout the region for the quality of its cattle and horses. Logan's reputation as a fair and honest dealer brought buyers from as far away as San Francisco, and they were able to expand further, buying up neighboring properties as they became available. They were not wealthy exactly, but they were comfortable, and that was more than enough. Pete passed away when James was 12, dying peacefully in his sleep after a long and full life. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, and Logan carved a headstone that read, "Here lies a good man and a true friend." The entire family mourned him, and Delilah found herself thinking about how lucky they had been to have him in their lives. Billy continued to visit, though less frequently as he got older. He eventually married a woman from Sacramento and started his own freighting business, but he always made time to stop by the ranch when he was passing through. The children adored Uncle Billy, who always brought them presents and told them outrageous stories that may or may not have been true. As James approached his 18th birthday, he began talking about wanting to go on a cattle drive, to experience what his parents had experienced all those years ago. Logan was reluctant at first, worried about the dangers, but Delilah understood the need. She talked to Logan late into the night, reminding him that they could not keep their son sheltered forever, that he needed to find his own way in the world. Finally, Logan relented, and that spring, James went on his first drive, helping to move a herd north to Oregon. He was gone for 6 weeks, and Delilah worried every single day, even though she tried not to show it. When he finally returned, dusty and exhausted but grinning from ear to ear, she felt a weight lift from her chest. "It was incredible, Mama," James said, his eyes shining. "I understand now why you and Papa love this life so much. There is nothing like it, being out there with the herd and the land and the sky." Delilah hugged him tight, blinking back tears. "I am glad you got to experience it, but I am also very glad you are home safe." Sarah announced at 16 that she had no intention of ever getting married, that she was going to run the ranch herself, and did not need a man to help her do it. Logan and Delilah exchanged amused glances, but did not argue. Sarah was strong-willed enough that arguing with her was usually futile. Besides, they figured she would change her mind when the right person came along. They were proven right a year later, when Sarah met a young man named Daniel West at a county fair. He was the son of a neighboring rancher, quiet and steady, and utterly besotted with their daughter. Sarah tried to fight it, but Delilah recognized the look in her eyes. It was the same look she had worn when she first started falling for Logan. Sarah and Daniel were married when she was 19, and Logan gave them a parcel of land on the far side of the ranch to start their own spread. They built a house and began building their own herd, and soon enough, Delilah and Logan were grandparents. Sarah's first child, a boy she named after Logan, was born in the spring of 1897, and Delilah held him and marveled at how the circle of life continued to turn. Thomas followed in his father's footsteps and became a trail boss, leading drives all over California and Nevada. He was good at it, with Logan's natural leadership and Delilah's ability to read people and situations. He never married, preferring the freedom of the trail, but he always came home between jobs, and the family welcomed him with open arms. Lucy, the youngest, surprised them all by showing an aptitude for numbers and business. She managed the ranch's accounts and helped negotiate sales, and her sharp mind and sharper tongue made her a formidable presence at any bargaining table. She married a lawyer from Redding, and they settled in town, though she visited the ranch often and remained deeply involved in its operations. As the new century dawned, Logan and Delilah found themselves in their early 40s, still active and involved in the ranch but increasingly willing to let the next generation take the lead. They had worked hard all their lives, and now it was time to enjoy the fruits of that labor. They took to spending their evenings on the porch, watching the sun set and talking about the old days. Sometimes they would ride out together, just the two of them, and spend the night under the stars like they had done when they were young. The passion between them had not dimmed with the years. If anything, it had deepened, becoming something richer and more complex. "You have any regrets?" Delilah asked one evening as they sat side by side, their hands clasped together. Logan thought about it for a long moment, then shook his head. "No, not a single one. Everything I have, everything I am, is because you rode into my life that day in Independence. You were the missing piece I did not even know I needed." "You gave me everything," Delilah said, her voice thick with emotion. "A home, a family, a purpose. You saw me when I felt invisible. You believed in me when I did not believe in myself. You earned that point position, Delilah. You earned it with your strength and your determination and your refusal to give up. I just recognized what was already there." She leaned over and kissed him, soft and sweet, and he kissed her back with all the love and devotion of a lifetime together. When they broke apart, Delilah smiled. "I would ride drag again if it meant finding you at the end of it. And I would put you at point on day one if I could do it all over again," Logan said. "Because the truth is, you were always meant to lead, Delilah. You were always meant to be at the front, not the back." They sat together as darkness fell, watching the stars come out one by one. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and closer by, they could hear the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. The wind carried the scent of hay and horses and home, and Delilah breathed it in, feeling grateful for every single moment that had led her here. The years continued to pass, bringing with them the inevitable changes and challenges of life. James took over more and more of the day-to-day operations of the ranch, proving himself to be as capable a rancher as his father. Sarah and Daniel's family grew, and soon there were grandchildren running all over the property, filling it with laughter and energy. Thomas continued to drive cattle until a bad fall from a horse convinced him it was time to settle down. He came back to the ranch permanently and took charge of the horse breeding program, which flourished under his expert care. Lucy and her husband had twin girls who were already showing signs of being as sharp and clever as their mother. Logan and Delilah watched it all with pride and satisfaction. They had built something lasting, something that would continue long after they were gone. The ranch was not just a piece of property. It was a legacy, a testament to what could be accomplished with hard work, determination, and love. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Logan surprised Delilah with a trip back to Independence. They had not been back since that fateful summer of 1878, and Delilah was curious to see how the town had changed. It had grown significantly, with new buildings and streets, but the bones of it were still the same. They stood at the spot where Delilah had first approached Logan about joining his outfit, and she could almost see her younger self, desperate and determined, with no idea what the future held. "What are you thinking about?" Logan asked, his arm around her waist. "About how scared I was that day," Delilah admitted. "I had no money, no prospects, and no idea what I was going to do, and then you gave me a chance." "Best decision I ever made," Logan said firmly. "Bar none." They visited the old stockyards where they had assembled the herd and walked the route they had taken out of town. So much had happened since then, so many miles traveled and obstacles overcome. They had built a life together from nothing, two people who had needed each other at exactly the right moment. That evening, they had dinner at the hotel where they had spent their wedding night. The building had been renovated and expanded, but the dining room still had those white tablecloths and flickering candles. Logan ordered champagne, and they toasted to 20 years of marriage and to all the years still to come. "To my wife," Logan said, raising his glass. "The strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for loving me." "To my husband," Delilah said, tears in her eyes. "The man who saw my potential when I could not see it myself. Thank you for giving me point. Thank you for giving me everything." They clinked glasses and drank, and then Logan pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a necklace, a delicate gold chain with a small pendant shaped like a cow. Delilah laughed and cried at the same time as Logan fastened it around her neck. "So you never forget where we started," he said. "I could never forget," Delilah promised. "Not in a million years." They made love that night with the tenderness and familiarity of 20 years together, and afterward, they lay in each other's arms and talked until dawn. They talked about their children and grandchildren, about the ranch and their plans for the future, about everything and nothing. And when the sun finally rose, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, they dressed and headed back north, back home to the life they had built. The ranch continued to thrive as the years rolled on. Automobiles began to appear on the roads, though the family still preferred horses for working the land. Electricity came to the area, and Delilah marveled at being able to flip a switch and have light instead of fussing with oil lamps. The world was changing rapidly, but the ranch remained a constant, a piece of the Old West preserved and protected. Logan and Delilah aged gracefully together. Logan's hair turned silver, and lines deepened around his eyes and mouth, but he was still strong and vital, still able to put in a full day's work when needed. Delilah's dark hair developed streaks of gray, and her hands became weathered from years of hard work, but her eyes were still as green and fierce as the day Logan first saw her. They celebrated their 25th anniversary surrounded by family, with a party that lasted well into the night. The children and grandchildren gave speeches about how Logan and Delilah had inspired them, how their love story was proof that true love existed and was worth fighting for. Delilah cried happy tears and held Logan's hand, overwhelmed by the outpouring of affection. "We did good," Logan whispered in her ear as they danced to a waltz that Thomas was playing on his fiddle. "We did," Delilah agreed, resting her head on his shoulder. "We did very good. As they entered their 50s, Logan and Delilah finally allowed themselves to truly retire. James and Sarah had the ranch well in hand, and there was no shortage of willing workers to help with the daily tasks. Logan and Delilah spent their days doing what they pleased, whether that was riding out to check on the herd, working in the garden, or simply sitting on the porch and enjoying the view. They took trips occasionally, visiting places they had always wanted to see. They went to San Francisco and marveled at the bustling city, so different from their quiet ranch. They traveled to Yosemite and stood in awe of the massive granite cliffs and thundering waterfalls. But no matter where they went, they were always glad to come home, to the land and the life they had built together. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching yet another spectacular sunset, Delilah turned to Logan with a soft smile. "Do you remember what you said to me that night at the river crossing, when we kissed for the first time?" "I said a lot of things that night," Logan replied, his eyes twinkling. "You will have to be more specific." "You said you had wanted to kiss me since the day I showed up in Independence," Delilah said, "that I looked like trouble." "And I was right," Logan said, pulling her close. "You were trouble, the best kind of trouble. You turned my whole world upside down, and I have been grateful for it every day since." "I love you," Delilah said simply. "After all these years, after everything we have been through, I love you more now than I did then. I did not think that was possible, but it is." "I love you too," Logan said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "More than I can ever put into words. You are my heart, Delilah, my home, my everything." They kissed as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in a riot of colors. And as darkness fell and the stars began to appear, they sat together in comfortable silence. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built a love that would last forever. The seasons continued their eternal dance. Spring brought new calves and foals. Summer brought long days of work and short nights of rest. Autumn brought the harvest and preparations for winter, and winter brought quiet reflection and time spent by the fire. The grandchildren grew and began having children of their own, and suddenly Logan and Delilah were great-grandparents, a fact that made them both laugh and shake their heads in wonder. "When did we get so old?" Delilah asked one morning as she watched Logan playing with their great-grandson, a toddler named Nathan who had Logan's blue eyes. "I do not feel old," Logan protested, making faces at Nathan until the little boy giggled. "I feel exactly the same as I did at 25. "Liar," Delilah said affectionately. "But I know what you mean. Inside, I still feel like that girl riding drag and dreaming of something better." "You found something better," Logan said, standing up with Nathan in his arms. "You found everything, and it was true." Delilah had found everything she had been searching for and more. She had found love and partnership, family and purpose, security and joy. The journey had not always been easy. There had been hard times and lean years, illnesses and injuries, losses and disappointments. But through it all, she and Logan had stood together, facing every challenge as partners and emerging stronger on the other side. As they entered their 60s, their health remained remarkably good. Logan still rode every day, and Delilah still worked in her garden and helped with the cooking for the family gatherings that happened regularly. They had slowed down, certainly, but they were far from finished living. One afternoon in late summer, as they sat on the porch shelling peas, Delilah looked over at her husband and felt her heart swell with love. His hands were spotted with age now, the knuckles slightly swollen from arthritis, but they were still strong and capable. His hair was completely silver and his face was deeply lined, but to her, he was as handsome as the day she met him. "What are you looking at?" Logan asked, catching her staring. "You," Delilah said simply. I was just thinking about how lucky I am, how lucky we both are." "Luck had nothing to do with it," Logan said. "You rode drag for 12 days without complaint. You earned everything that came after." "You gave me point on the 13th, Delilah countered. "That changed everything. That was the moment I knew you saw me, really saw me." "How could I not see you?" Logan set down his bowl of peas and reached for her hand. "You were the most remarkable person I had ever met. You still are." They sat holding hands as the afternoon faded into evening, and Delilah thought about all the years that had passed, all the moments both big and small that had made up their life together. She thought about their first kiss by the river, their wedding in Sacramento, the births of their children, the expansion of the ranch, the laughter and tears and everything in between. It had been a good life. No more than good. It had been extraordinary. As the sun set on another day, painting the sky in familiar shades of orange and gold, Delilah leaned over and kissed her husband. He kissed her back, and for a moment they were young again, full of hope and possibility and love. When they broke apart, both smiling, Logan touched her cheek with infinite gentleness. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked, as he always did. "Same time tomorrow," Delilah confirmed, as she always did. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they sat together on the porch of the home they had built, surrounded by the land they loved and the family they had created. The wind carried the familiar scents of hay and horses, of earth and growing things, of home. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed softly, and closer by, they could hear the sounds of grandchildren playing. It was a simple moment, unremarkable in many ways, but it was also everything. It was the culmination of a journey that had started 30 years ago in the dust and heat of a California summer, when a desperate woman joined a cattle drive and caught the eye of a trail boss. It was proof that love could grow in the harshest conditions, that partnerships built on respect and trust could weather any storm, that two people who were willing to work hard and hold on tight could build something beautiful and lasting. Delilah Zeller, née Winters, closed her eyes and breathed deep, committing this moment to memory. The feel of Logan's hand in hers, rough and warm and familiar. The sound of family all around them, the legacy they had created together. The peace that came from knowing she was exactly where she belonged, with exactly who she belonged with. She had ridden drag for 12 days and never complained. The cowboy had given her point on the 13th. And from that moment on, they had ridden side by side, through all the challenges and triumphs that life could throw at them. They had built a ranch, raised a family, and loved each other with a fierce and constant devotion that only deepened with time. As the last light faded from the sky and the stars burned bright overhead, Delilah opened her eyes and looked at Logan. He was already looking at her, and the love in his eyes was as clear and strong as it had been on their wedding day. "I would do it all again," she whispered. "Every single moment exactly the same way." "Me too," Logan whispered back, without hesitation, without doubt. "I would find you again in every lifetime." They sat together as night fell, two souls perfectly matched, two hearts beating as one. And in that moment, surrounded by everything they had built and everyone they loved, Delilah knew with absolute certainty that she had found her happily ever after. Not in a fairy tale or a dream, but in the real, messy, beautiful chaos of life with Logan Zeller. It was more than she had ever dared to hope for. It was everything. The years continued to flow like the creek through their property, constant and unchanging even as everything around it evolved. Their children grew into capable adults who ran the ranch with skill and pride. Their grandchildren married and had children of their own, and the family tree continued to branch and grow. The ranch itself expanded further, becoming one of the most successful operations in Northern California, known for the quality of its livestock and the integrity of its owners. Logan and Delilah watched it all with satisfaction and pride. They had started with nothing but determination and hope, and they had built an empire. Not an empire of wealth or power, but an empire of family and legacy, of love and hard work. It was the kind of success that could not be measured in dollars or acres, but in the laughter of great-grandchildren and the respect of their community. As they entered their 70s, their pace slowed further, but their minds remained sharp, and their love remained strong. They spent more time reminiscing about the old days, telling stories to anyone who would listen about the great cattle drive of 1878, about riding drag and crossing rivers and falling in love under the stars. The younger generations listened with fascination, unable to imagine their dignified grandparents as young and reckless and full of fire. But Delilah and Logan remembered. They remembered every dusty mile, every challenge overcome, every stolen kiss and whispered promise. Those memories were precious, polished smooth by time and retelling, and they brought them out often to examine and enjoy. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered for a celebration that lasted 3 days. There were over 60 people in attendance, all of them connected by blood or marriage to the two people who had started it all. James, now a gray-haired man in his late 40s, gave a speech that brought everyone to tears. "My parents taught us that love is not just a feeling," he said, his voice strong and clear. "It is a choice you make every single day. It is waking up and choosing to stand by your partner, even when things are hard. It is working side by side to build something lasting. It is respecting each other enough to listen, to compromise, to grow together instead of apart. They have shown us what a true partnership looks like, and they have set an example that we all try to live up to." Logan stood then, pulling Delilah to her feet beside him. She looked beautiful in a new dress that Sarah had insisted on buying for her, her silver hair swept up in an elegant style, her green eyes still bright and alert. Logan cleared his throat, and the assembled family fell silent. "50 years ago, I married the most remarkable woman I have ever known," he said. "And every day since then has been an adventure. We have had our ups and downs, our struggles and our triumphs. We have raised 4 incredible children, watched them have children of their own, and now we are blessed with great-grandchildren. We have built this ranch from almost nothing into something we can all be proud of. But none of that matters as much as the simple fact that I get to wake up every morning next to the woman I love. Delilah, you are my heart and my home. You always have been, and you always will be. Here is to 50 years, and to however many more we are blessed with." He raised his glass, and everyone followed suit, toasting to Logan and Delilah and to the love that had started it all. Delilah, overcome with emotion, could barely speak, but she managed to whisper, "I love you," and that was enough. They danced that night, swaying together to music played by Thomas on his fiddle and Lucy's oldest daughter on piano. Logan held Delilah close, and despite the aches and pains of age, they moved together with the easy grace of a lifetime of partnership. The family watched and smiled, and more than one person pulled out a handkerchief to dab at their eyes. After the party, when the guests had finally departed, and the house was quiet once more, Logan and Delilah sat on their porch in the gathering darkness. It had become their ritual, this evening vigil, a time to reflect and reconnect after the busyness of the day. 50 years, Delilah said softly. "Where did the time go?" "I do not know," Logan admitted. "It feels like just yesterday you were riding drag, and I was trying to figure out how to talk to you without sounding like a fool." "You never sounded like a fool," Delilah said. "You always knew exactly what to say." "That is not how I remember it," Logan said with a laugh. "I remember being tongue-tied and awkward, trying to impress you and probably failing miserably." "You impressed me by treating me like an equal," Delilah said seriously. "By giving me a chance when no one else would. By seeing my potential and helping me reach it. That was what won my heart, Logan." Not fancy words or grand gestures, but simple respect and kindness. Logan pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear one by one. The night was cool and clear, and somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted. The ranch was quiet, peaceful, and Delilah felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. "I hope I go first," Logan said suddenly, and Delilah turned to look at him in surprise. "What? I hope I go first," he repeated, "because I do not think I could bear a world without you in it. These 50 years have been the best of my life, and I do not want to face whatever comes next alone." Delilah felt tears prick her eyes. "Do not talk like that. We have years yet." "Maybe," Logan said. "I hope so. But if not, I want you to know that every single day with you has been a gift. I have lived a full and happy life, and it is all because of you." "We still have time," Delilah insisted, gripping his hand tightly. "We are not done yet." And they were not. They had several more good years, years filled with love and laughter and the simple pleasures of growing old together. They watched more great-grandchildren be born, saw the ranch continue to prosper, and enjoyed the peace that came from knowing they had lived well and loved deeply. But time, as it always does, eventually ran out. Logan passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 76, with Delilah lying beside him. She woke in the early morning light to find him gone, his hand still clasped in hers, a slight smile on his face as if he had died dreaming of something wonderful. The grief was overwhelming, a physical pain that made it hard to breathe. Delilah sat with Logan's body for a long time, stroking his silver hair and whispering all the things she wished she had said more often. "I love you. Thank you. You were my everything." When James finally came to check on them and found his mother weeping over his father's still form, he wrapped her in his arms and let her cry, his own tears falling into her hair. They buried Logan on the hill next to Pete, with a view of the entire ranch spread out below. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, all of them wanting to pay their respects to a man who had been respected and admired throughout the region. Delilah stood dry-eyed and dignified through the service, accepting condolences with grace, but inside she was screaming. How was she supposed to go on without him? How was she supposed to face each day knowing he would not be there beside her? But she did go on, because that was what Logan would have wanted. She woke each morning and got dressed and went about her day, even though everything felt hollow and meaningless. The family rallied around her, making sure she was never alone, bringing her meals and sitting with her in the evenings. Slowly, painfully, she began to adjust to her new reality. She found comfort in the memories. She would sit on the porch in the spot where she and Logan had spent so many evenings, and she would talk to him as if he were still there. She told him about the grandchildren and great-grandchildren, about the ranch, and how well James was managing everything. She told him she missed him, that she loved him, that she could not wait to see him again. And gradually, the grief became less sharp. It never went away completely, but it became something she could carry, a weight she could bear. She filled her days with activity, helping with the great-grandchildren, working in her garden, maintaining the ranch records that Lucy used to manage before she got too busy with her own family. She stayed involved and engaged, determined to honor Logan's memory by living fully until her own time came. 3 years after Logan's death, Delilah celebrated her 80th birthday surrounded by family. There were now over 100 people who could trace their lineage back to that dusty cattle drive in 1878, and as many of them as could manage came to celebrate the matriarch of their family. Delilah looked around at all the faces, young and old, and felt a profound sense of accomplishment. This was her legacy. These people, this family, this ranch. All of it had started with a woman desperate enough to ride drag and a man wise enough to recognize her worth. She died the following spring, passing peacefully in her sleep just as Logan had. When James went to check on her that morning, he found her with a smile on her face and a look of peace so profound it took his breath away. In her hand, clutched tight even in death, was the gold pendant shaped like a cow that Logan had given her on their 20th anniversary. They buried her beside Logan on the hill, and if you were to visit that spot today, you would find two simple headstones side by side. Logan's reads, "Here lies a good man who loved well." Delilah's reads, "Here lies a remarkable woman who rode point." Between them, at the base of the stones, someone has planted roses that bloom every summer in shades of red and gold, a living reminder of the love that started it all. The ranch continues to this day, still owned and operated by descendants of Logan and Delilah Zeller. The house has been expanded and modernized, but the original structure remains, preserved as a tribute to the couple who built it. The creek still runs clear and cold, and cattle still graze on the rolling hills. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun is setting and the shadows grow long, people swear they can see two figures sitting on the old porch, hands clasped together, watching the stars come out. It is just a story, of course, a legend passed down through generations. But like all the best legends, it contains a kernel of truth. Logan and Delilah Zeller were real people who lived real lives and built something extraordinary together. They proved that love could flourish in the harshest conditions, that partnership and respect could form the foundation of a lasting relationship, that two people willing to work hard and hold on tight could build a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. She rode drag for 12 days and never complained. He gave her point on the 13th. And from that moment forward, they rode through life side by side, partners in every sense of the word. They faced challenges and celebrated triumphs. They raised a family and built a ranch and loved each other with a devotion that never wavered. And when their time finally came, they left behind a legacy of love and hard work that continues to inspire everyone who hears their story. It was not a perfect love story. There were arguments and disagreements, hard times and moments of doubt. But it was a real love story, built on mutual respect and genuine affection, strengthened by shared goals and common values. It was the kind of love that endures not because it is easy, but because both people choose it every single day, even when it is hard. And that, perhaps, is the real lesson of Logan and Delilah Zeller. Love is not something that just happens to you. It is something you build day by day, choice by choice, moment by moment. It requires work and commitment and sacrifice. But when you find the right person, someone who sees you and values you and stands beside you through everything life throws your way, all that work becomes worthwhile. It becomes the foundation of something beautiful and lasting, something that can weather any storm and emerge stronger on the other side. She rode drag for 12 days and never complained. He gave her point on the 13th. And in doing so, he gave her everything, just as she gave him everything in return. That was their story, and it is a story worth remembering, worth sharing, worth holding up as an example of what love can be when two people are brave enough and strong enough to build it together. It is a story that started in the dust and heat of a California summer and ended decades later on a quiet ranch in Northern California. But the love at its center never changed, never dimmed, never wavered. It was constant and true, from that first ride at Point all the way to the end, and beyond into whatever comes next. That is the story of Logan and Delilah Zeller, and it is a story that will live on as long as there are people who believe in the power of love and the strength of the human spirit. It is a story of the Wild West, of cattle drives and hard work and dreams built from nothing. But most of all, it is a love story, pure and simple, and those are the stories that matter most. Those are the stories that last forever.